Hello there, my name is John Williamson. I'm a bass player with a background in physics research. I'm working with the ISM to make these videos on how to play music online in real time. The results can be really fantastic, the software you need is free, and the technical barrier is small, especially if you've ever used any computer music software before. Even if you haven't, this tutorial will show you exactly what to do. So I'm going to look down at my computer now, and we'll get into the first session, which is just bit of an introduction, some examples, and some checks you can do to make sure that you have what you need to move forward. So the first thing to say is that audio latency, which means delay, of 20 to 30 milliseconds or less is possible with decent consumer internet, and we will quantify what decent means shortly, and with distance of up to a few hundred miles, although that's of course a ballpark figure. So 20 to 30 milliseconds is about the latency you would have in real life if you were sitting in a room 8 or 9 meters away from somebody. So you can see that this number is really something that is going to enable us to have a real-time experience. We'll be able to play stuff that is rhythmically complex. We'll be able to keep time together without a metronome, and so on and so on. So it's well worth looking into. A few caveats before we start. Real-time video is completely different from audio, and it's much harder to achieve. So what I've seen people do is to have a real-time audio connection combined with a Zoom call, and then they mute the Zoom call when they want to play. For example, singers, they might sing together and they would be keeping in time via their ears, so to speak, but the conductor would still be there, giving conducting that doesn't require an immediate response. So, for example, conducting dynamics and expression, it applies more or less the same as it would normally. So that can be quite successful. The next caveat, I use a Mac. Everything can be done on Windows as well. The principles carry over exactly, it's just the way that you do it is a bit different, and I can't show you that directly because I don't have Windows. We might address that in the written notes a bit, or we might provide links to documentation for the software that I'll talk about. It all has sort of support forums on the internet and so on. But if you have a Mac, my plan is to show you pretty much every step in the process to show you what to do. On that topic, the final caveat is that this is not plug and play. So it's not just like firing up Microsoft Word and writing a document and there you go. That said, it's not any harder than learning to use Sibelius or recording yourself at home using GarageBand or Logic or similar. So even if you haven't used any computer music programs before, please don't worry, I'm going to show you every step, as I said, and it's not something that requires a great deal of technical skill to learn how to do. So don't be afraid, and let's go for it. So I'm going to get straight into some examples here. Just going to my internet browser. So this is a clip from my Instagram page. JJ Williamson Bass is my handle. I'm playing with a piano player called Liam Dunnicky here. So that is, jazz tune. We're playing rhythmically together. We don't have a metronome, and we played at the same time. The next thing I'd like to show is a clip from Dan Tepfer. So if you search for Dan Tepfer, T-E-P-F-E-R, and Christian McBride, you'll find this link very easily. Dan is a piano player in New York, and he's one of the pioneers of using online real-time music software. Great, fantastic. So again, as you can hear, there's no metronome involved. They're playing at the same time. They're playing exceptionally well in time together, and the feel is great. So in a way, I would say that kind of tune, that kind of music, jazz, is the acid test for online real-time music. It really needs you to feel as though you're playing together in the same room, and I think they did there. So those are some examples, and I think you'll agree it's worth trying to see how to do that. So we'll move on. The main thing to get across in the introduction here is that there is a trade-off of latency, which means delay, versus glitches or dropouts in the audio. It's fundamental to the process to understand that this trade-off exists. Okay. Zoom and Skype and Microsoft Teams and so on, they exist at the end of a spectrum where they have latency in order to present a smooth experience. So that means that the data that comes in representing the video and sound of the person who you're calling, as it comes in, it doesn't get displayed straight away. Instead, there is a buffering period, which is quite long, during which the next bits of data for the next frame of video and the next bit of sound are being prepared. That gives time for the program to sort of piece together a smooth experience, and as long as the internet is okay, you won't have any dropouts. You'll have a consistent picture and a smooth audio experience. But as you'll know, if you've ever tried, the latency is too large to play music in these programs. So at the other end of the spectrum, we have online real-time music applications like JackTrip or Jamulus or SoundJack, and there's many more. These ones transmit the data, receive the data, and then the buffering period is extremely small. So that means more or less the data is played, because it's audio, the data is played straight away. And that means if the next bit of data hasn't arrived in time, or if there has been packet loss, which is an internet word, but it just means the data's got lost on the way from one place to another, then there will be a dropout or a glitch in the audio. So that's something to bear in mind, but it does mean that the latency can be extremely small, depending on the internet conditions. So if you can get to this end of the spectrum, then you can have latency which is so small that you don't notice it, and I mean that literally and truly. You may have glitches, but they can be tuned, these programs, so you can move them slightly this way to the left, right, in order to reduce glitches and increase the latency very slightly. So it might be that the latency is still unnoticeable, or it might be that you really don't want any glitches at all, but the music you're playing is slow and doesn't have a strong rhythmic feel to it, and so you can increase your latency a bit more. This idea of tuning the trade-off is central to having a good experience in online real-time music, and in my opinion, people not understanding that is why so many people have tried these programs or similar and bounced off them, so to speak. So we're going to understand this trade-off, and I'm going to show you how to optimize the balance for your conditions, because this trade-off depends completely on the internet speed. If you have God's gift to internet connections, then you might not need to worry about the trade-off at all. You can go for really low latency and you still won't have many glitches at all. Everybody else who has more pedestrian internet, they might need to tweak this balance just to find the point where the latency is still acceptable and there's not too many glitches. It depends entirely on how good your internet is and how good the internet is of the people that you're playing with as well. However, I want to emphasize that you can still record glitch-free. So on the example that I played of me and Liam earlier on, there were no glitches at all. Both of the audio tracks were pristine, even though as we played them, we heard glitches on each other's channel in our earphones. So I'll show you how you get around that in order to produce a glitch-free recording again later in the series. I just want to show you what I mean by a glitch in case it doesn't mean anything to you. Going back to Instagram here. Okay, here we go. So listen out in the right-hand channel, I think. There it was. So you would have heard, and go back if you didn't hear it, you would have heard a glitch in the right channel there. That's because in that case I was recording the audio that Liam was sending over the internet to me, and it had glitches in there. But as you can see, it's not very obtrusive. It was extremely rare actually on that particular day. And so what that means is that you can really optimize this trade-off for low latency and tolerate a few glitches perhaps, especially given that you can record glitch-free. Okay, so you can really target low latency for the purpose of rhythmic security, but still produce a glitch-free recording. It really opens a lot of stuff in terms of remote recording possibilities. So let's go back in here. Rule 1, 2 and 3 is that you can't use Wi-Fi. There's no way, really. It introduces too much latency right at the beginning and you'll be fighting a losing battle. You need Ethernet, which looks like this. This is very cheap. That's an Ethernet cable. It plugs directly into your computer and into the router. So you have a wired connection, as it's called, to your internet router rather than Wi-Fi. If you have a newer Mac, you might need an adapter like this. So this is from USB-C to Ethernet, or if it's medium old, you might need Thunderbolt to Ethernet. So Google the age of your Mac and see what ports it has, or just Google what does a Thunderbolt port look like, what does a USB-C port look like. You know, it's not hard. You can always ask somebody who knows, but you just want to find which adapter is needed. Again, they're quite cheap in order to connect via Ethernet to your internet router. The next thing is to test the internet. So this is central to the process, as I said earlier on, so we better test our internet before we invest time in doing anything else. I'm typing Cloudflare speed test, F-A-R-E for Cloudflare. I'm going to click this link and it's going to test my internet speed. So I'm actually on Wi-Fi here, as you can see, but I should be doing this on Ethernet, and that's what I'd suggest that you do as well. So there's 4 numbers of importance. Here's the download speed, the bigger the better. Coming up here shortly is the upload speed, and here the latency and the jitter should be lower. So low is good for these numbers. That's because download and upload speed are sort of the width of a channel. It's sort of like how much water can flow through the river per second, that kind of thing. So those need to be large to send a lot of data, and that's what people usually talk about when they mean speed of the internet. But this is equally as important. Latency and jitter refer to how or the amount of time that a small packet of data takes to get from one place to another. So it's nothing to do with the width of the stream, it's just like, you know, individual bit of water or a stick, so to speak. How quickly can that get down the river? So you want small numbers here and you want big numbers here. This is pretty good, even though I'm on Wi-Fi. But even so, that doesn't mean that I can use Wi-Fi for my online real-time connection. So don't be fooled into thinking that I still need to use Ethernet. And it would make more sense to test this whilst connected via Ethernet with the Wi-Fi turned off. Going back into the notes here, I'll give some ballpark figures for what is required. Download, you want 20 or more here. Upload 10 or more, and then single figures for the latency and jitter. That's ballpark numbers, but those are good. It gives you an idea. By all means, you can try if your numbers are worse than this, and you should. But the extent to which your numbers are worse than this is the extent to which you'll have to sacrifice some latency in order to remove glitches sufficiently to hear what's going on. So you might not be able to get down to truly real-time speeds. If your numbers are disappointing, feel free to call your internet provider because you might not be getting what you're paying for. On the other hand, you might be getting what you're paying for, but you can pay very slightly more and get better speeds. So often the upload speed is very small. You might find if you use Dropbox, it takes ages to upload files to Dropbox or something. And so you might be able to pay a bit more and get a higher upload speed as well, for example. So don't be afraid to phone your internet provider. An audio interface is optional. They look like this, and they're connected to the computer via USB or sometimes FireWire, as it's called. And they allow you to connect microphones and guitar leads and stuff into the computer. So if you've ever tried home recording, you probably have used one of these. But if you don't have one, it doesn't matter. You can easily use the internal microphone and headphone socket of your computer. That's fine. Headphones are not optional. Technically they are, and once you figure out what's going on, I'm sure you can figure out a way of using speakers and avoiding feedback. But while we're focusing on setting up the connections and stuff, I would just use headphones because it's not worth having the possibility of feedback and the sort of doubt as to where a sound is coming from. Okay, so definitely use headphones. The software is more the same than it is different. So by that I mean that all online real-time music software follows quite similar principles, and they're all entirely dependent on good internet speed. So there's no software that is so good that it removes the need for decent internet, as I spoke about a few minutes ago. So that's something to bear in mind. There's no point going around the houses of different software thinking about, maybe this one will work if your internet speed is too slow. Okay. That being said, I'll focus on two examples and really just one for these tutorials. Jamulus is quite a user-friendly software to get up and running with, which is good. So by all means try that. But I'm going to focus the tutorial on Jacktrip, which is what I use and what Dan Tepfer uses and so on, because in my opinion it's the best way to get a really professional or professionally usable connection going. The audio is uncompressed, if that means anything to you, and it's a bit more configurable somehow. It's a bit more connectable for different recording workflows and live streaming and stuff, as you will see later in the tutorial. So Jamulus can be configured and it can be tweaked, and you can do that trade-off of latency and glitches that I spoke about. But in order to do that in Jamulus, you have to understand principles which we will learn in the course of learning about Jacktrip anyway. So it's not as if you can fire up Jamulus and then immediately have a great experience. You still need to understand a bit about that trade-off, or about setting up as a server, as we'll cover in a moment, etc. So for all those reasons, I'm going to focus on Jacktrip, and I would urge you not to just fire up Jamulus or Jamkazam or one of the more user-friendly programs and then give up when it doesn't immediately give you a great result. Because, as I said, it's all about understanding that trade-off and really balancing it and finding the optimal point for your own conditions. So let's look at some theory here of how two people can connect. I would urge you to begin with two people first of all. You can add more people, and we'll get onto that later on, but it's just simpler to start like this. So if two people want to connect, they could connect with an external server. So that means they both connect to this server. Server means a kind of industrial scale computer out there in the world that connects to and supplies content to people who connect to the internet. So for example, Netflix have servers, and their videos are on the servers and are streamed out to people who request them. So person A and person B here could connect to this server, which would handle the connection between them. That would work. That's the default option in Jamulus, for example, is to both connect to an external server. But if you have two people, the best chance of really low latency and therefore a real-time experience is to actually have a direct connection like this. It's called peer-to-peer for obvious reasons. And in this case, one person sets up as the server, so they actually run a server on their own computer. The other person is called the client for interest's sake in this setup. But the benefit of this is that you just have one connection between a direct connection between the two parties, rather than going through an external server. So I'll show you how to set that up. Let's think about adding a third person here. Now we could connect them in an analogous way, so we could have this triangle of connections around here. The details are not important yet, but I want you to look at this bit I've highlighted here. It's the fact that each person now has two sets of incoming and outgoing connections. So that means they need twice as much bandwidth, or the river needs to be twice as wide in order to handle the incoming and outgoing data. If you add a fourth person, then each person suddenly needs 3 times as much bandwidth as they had before. And you can see how that would eventually scale quite badly as you increase the number of people. So the other option is to have what's called a hub server. The hub is the middle of a wheel, and here are the spokes of the wheel, so that's why it's called that. And this server might be an external server, and then everyone connects to that server, and they just have one connection now. So even if you add a fourth person, everybody individually still has only one connection. Only the server has to be able to handle more than one connection simultaneously, and servers are often adapted to do that. But there's no reason why the server couldn't be just one of the people involved. So I'm with HyperOptic, who provide internet to my building, and so I have a really incredibly fast internet connection. I'm not boasting, it's just true. But that means when I play with more than one person, I often act as the server because my bandwidth is very large. It doesn't stress my internet too much to act as the server in that way. So we better wrap up soon because my battery's dying. But that's all I wanted to talk about for the introduction, is just introducing these principles and showing you some examples of what can be done. So in the next stage we'll talk about preparing to act as a server in order to give you the best chance of getting really low latency and a real-time experience. The the first time you try this. So we'll talk about these topics, but fear not, we're going to be back soon and go into the details. Thanks a lot.